here's Brody Brazil.
Well, you can just go ahead and file all of this under the category of super predictable. And I'm not talking about the result of what the Rays have come up with here and their response to Pinellas County. I'm talking about the timing of this overall situation. And the backstory goes like this. Pinellas County was delaying a couple different times on votes for bonds for the Rays' new stadium. And because of that, the Rays responded to the city of St. Petersburg, actually, and said, well, maybe this deal is dead. Pinellas County heard that and said, well, we need to know by December 1st if you're still in this thing or if you're out of this thing. Otherwise, we'll just put off these votes forever. We'll never take them if you're saying you're actually out on the deal. They needed in writing, are you in or are you out? This was a letter from Kathleen Peters, the chairwoman of Pinellas County. And so the Rays have ultimately responded. They say that things are still in effect, and we'll get to their response in full in just a second. But it's also important that you know that everybody else is watching this unfold. In fact, even neighbors of St. Petersburg and Pinellas County, like the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County, they're watching all of this very closely, and they're not afraid to comment on this, are they?
We're going to respect the process. Let's see what happens with the season. Let's see what happens in St. Pete. And when that time comes, we'll be ready.
Yeah, so it's not just St. Petersburg and Pinellas County. This is the Rays and maybe everything else that's going on. But here is the Rays' response to Pinellas County and obviously ultimately St. Petersburg. They say what was originally approved back in July 2024 is still in effect. So as much as their president, Brian Auld, went out and said that the deal is essentially dead because of the 2-month delay and the fact that the team would have to open the stadium now in 2029 instead of 2028. They said the deal was essentially dead. Now they've kind of gone back on that. They're saying that everything is still in effect. But I feel like those words were used in very specifically and very carefully, because the team also in this very same statement says they cannot alone afford to open this stadium anymore on the 2029 deadline. Now, they were supposed to break ground. They were supposed to have these votes back in October so that everything would be ready for a January 2025 groundbreaking for a stadium opening in the beginning months of 2028. Well, we're basically on the corner of right on the corner of December here, and it doesn't seem like groundbreaking is going to happen if these votes even take place and are favorable mid-December, late December. It feels like at this point everything is being pushed back. The timeline and the sequencing is too tight here. But the team says all of a sudden, things are in effect, it's not dead, but we can't afford to do this alone anymore. So they cannot do this, they say, on a 2029 deadline, which again, I remind you, was only a 2-month delay. They had Hurricane Milton that made its way through Florida in early October, so they pushed the vote back 1 month. The county said that they didn't have representatives from the Rays at their November meeting, their early November meeting, so they decided to push things back again, and that's when the Rays got upset about all of this. So a 2-month delay could end a multi-billion-dollar stadium and development project. It feels like this all could have been planned better with some alternatives in mind instead of just saying, all right, it has to happen this way or the highway, and that's it. The Rays also said that they would not have gone forward with all of this if they knew that the city council or the county commissioners had the ability to delay or reverse the project, kind of like they're doing at this point. Now, you also understand that an election happened since the approval of this project, the initial approval of this project back in summer, and where we are now. There's 2 county commissioners alone who are different from the ones that initially voted yes in approving this stadium and ballpark project back in the summer months. So the Rays are now maybe feeling a little bit of remorse for not getting this done before the county commissioners flipped over. The statement here by the Rays in this letter really takes the weight off their own shoulders and kind of points the fingers at local government and saying, quote, the Rays have fulfilled its obligations to date. Wouldn't it be their obligations to date? And continue to wait for decisions and actions by the city of St. Petersburg and Pinellas County. End quote. So as much as this was a letter to say, yes, we're still in this, yes, this is still in effect, it didn't seem to have any pleasantries in it. I haven't read the full letter. I've not been privileged to see that, but the point is it does seem like it was very straightforward. It wasn't necessarily polite or cordial. And one more thing, I totally forgot about this. Should have mentioned it before at the beginning of this video. The timing is so predictable because of the Thanksgiving holiday this past week and the December 1st deadline. What was it, 5, 6, 7 days ago when Pinellas County came out with that letter? Their chairwoman basically said, make a decision by December 1st. Are you in or are you out? You knew the Rays were not instantly going to respond and say that they were in or out. They were also not going to do it on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving or even the day after Thanksgiving. So here we are on the most predictable day, November 30th, right before the December 1st deadline here on a Saturday. Again, that's why it was so predictable that the Rays would wait till this final moment. But again, not necessarily a very convincing response in all of this. Like, yeah, this is still in effect, but we've got a bunch of other problems with all this, and we're still not necessarily happy about all of this. Let's look at this all in reality now. And again, I mentioned the two county commissioners, they are different. They and their votes are different from the commissioners that ultimately took the initial votes back in the summer, and even back then it was quite narrow. So now with more negative votes, potentially, it could sink this project in terms of approving the bonds. We'll get to these two votes here from the county and the city, but there are still votes to be taken, and now they're being taken by different people with different perspectives and opinions and a little bit more time and experience in this process. And if they're less favorable, obviously that totally hurts this project. The county takes a December 17th vote. They're scheduled to, and now it seems that they will, right, with the Rays saying that they're still in. Had the Rays officially backed out today, that December 17th vote doesn't happen. But it's for $312 million. This is the one that was initially supposed to take place in October, delayed, and then delayed once again in November. But December 17th, $312 million of bonds for Pinellas County to fund their share of the ballpark project. Now, they can take this vote and say yes, and then it moves on to the city of St. Petersburg. Or they can take this vote and say no, and then on their behalf, the project, seemingly would essentially be near dead. St. Petersburg also has to sign off on their share of the public funds. They'll have to have votes, plural, no later than January 9th for $287.5 million for the stadium alone, and also $142 more million for the infrastructure. But you kind of see how maybe the city of St. Petersburg has some luxury here in the fact that they don't have to go first. They'll delay it. They'll wait to see what happened here with, number one, this letter of intention, but also the county's vote on December 17th. You'd have to imagine that St. Petersburg is probably going to do that vote as close to January 9th in 2025, as close as possible. Commissioner Dave Agers of Pinellas County, he was a no vote initially on this project back in the summertime. And he's saying now via the Tampa Bay Times that he will meet with the Rays once again to try and shore up any details, to try and maybe bridge some common ground here. But he says he's, quote, not overly optimistic about all of this and the way that it's playing out. So let me take some even bigger picture approaches here on all of this. These are the takeaways. These are kind of how I'm feeling entirely about this situation. Number one, forget the political side, forget the local government side. Let's look at the Rays and what they're doing here and the message they sent with this letter saying that everything is still in effect. At this point, there's no way that they're still putting all of their eggs in the basket of St. Petersburg and Pinellas County, right? There's no way they're not talking to Tampa. There's no way they're not talking to somebody like Nashville. I'm not floating these rumors. I'm not starting this speculation. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just looking at it from the approach of, if you're doing your self-diligence, you are right now exploring all your options. If you know that you're having difficulty right here, you're probably trying to see what else is on the menu and on the agenda. And that's not the fault of the city of St. Petersburg and Pinellas County. Like, they've had their challenges with the Rays here. The Rays have been quite prickly about this. They haven't necessarily been accepting of the timeline, and some delays and a hurricane, multiple hurricanes that made their way through Florida. But I'm just saying, from the Rays' perspective, let's call it out right now to show you what they're probably doing. I'm not saying it's the best thing for everybody, especially baseball fans in the Tampa Bay region. The Rays are probably looking elsewhere for other options. There's no way they're only negotiating with Pinellas County and the city of St. Petersburg. The Rays initially for this new ballpark project, it's not just the stadium, it's the entire gas plant district. They were supposed to only pay initially $700 million for the ballpark. But through the approvals and through all of this, they were always entirely responsible for all the overruns. And now they're seeing a couple things happen here. Things getting more expensive than maybe even they were back in the summertime or a year ago or 2 years ago when all of this initially came up. They're also seeing that some delays might happen. So they're not very happy about the fact that they said yes to something that's now evolving and changing and becoming more expensive. And that brings me to the whole point of this. All of us have to consider similar things like this on a smaller scale in our own personal lives, investments or buying something large, a house, a car. The timing of the purchase is everything, and the financing of the purchase is a lot of times everything. And if you can't do it over the long run, and you can't maybe put up with some of the variables that might present themselves, it's bad planning. You went into this with a bad plan. Now, I'm not saying that, sometimes things change and that's entirely change, and that's not something anybody could have prepared for, but a little preparation, a little bit more flexibility in such a large-scale plan here would have done everybody a lot more good in the long run. Time is not ticking on Tropicana Field because the lease, it still exists for 3 more years. The thing is, 4 more years, 4 more years, but it's inactive right now. So long as Tropicana Field is not serviceable for the Rays to actually play baseball there, their lease just basically goes dormant. So the Rays and Tropicana Field are still both upheld to that lease, but not for this upcoming 2025 season. It's not canceled. It doesn't take a year off the Rays lease. It just postpones everything that was written into their original agreement, the Rays and Tropicana Field. But time is ticking on this temporary stadium situation. And I'm telling you, that's the dangerous part here. And 2025 might be okay enough, but I guarantee you, if the Rays go back into playing at Steinbrenner Field for 2026 and beyond, there's going to be some criticisms, there's going to be some complaints. Obviously, the Rays' schedule, as documented, I just covered that the other day, totally unconventional, totally abnormal to what everybody else is doing. Basically, the whole first 60, 70 games of the season at home, and then the remaining 90, almost 100, basically entirely on the road. It's like 70 of the final 100 games on the road for the Rays. So time is ticking on that situation. If the Rays can't figure out a permanent home or what to do with Tropicana Field, all of this is going against their existence in Tampa Bay. I'm sorry to say it like that, but I've seen how this goes. I've just experienced it firsthand. And let me just end by saying there's nothing cordial here. The Rays letter, what the county chair people are saying, what city council members of St. Petersburg are saying, I don't see anybody even trying to really publicly bridge the gaps here that exist. And maybe some of the gaps are just unbridgeable. Maybe it is as simple as that. And maybe behind the scenes, there's so much going on that can't be fixed, and it's kind of bubbling up to the surface, and now we're all witnessing it. But I'm just saying there's not much that leads me to think there's a positive tipping point right around the corner. So the December 1st deadline hasn't approached yet, but the Rays beat it. They said that they are still in. It's still in effect with a lot of caveats. I mean, the main one being we're still in, but we also can't afford this anymore. We'll see how that goes. You made it here to the end of the video. I really appreciate that. Thumbs up down below greatly helps me, this video, and this channel. And while you're down there, before this ends, take one quick second. Make sure that you are already subscribing to this channel. That means I get to see you back here next time.